Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror movie review as part of my Days of the Dead uh, horror convention series for the month of February 2023 here. If you're new to this series, basically, I'm going to be going to a horror convention called Days of the Dead in Las Vegas in just over a week now. And in prep for that, I'm watching and reviewing certain horror movies related to some of the guests that are going to be at this horror convention to sort of prepped for going. So, and then of course, I'll also be having videos when I'm actually at the convention, like wrap up videos at the end of each day from my hotel room. But anyway, that's all down the road. Today we're going to review the next movie in this series. As far as prep for the convention goes, and that is another sequel. Seems like this series is full of sequels. I did Hellraiser 2, I did Terrifier 2, and now I'm going to do Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part Two. Um, yeah, I have the MGM Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the gruesome edition, as it's called. Got some widescreen. It's a widescreen edition. Got some special features on it. Um, this was actually the first time I'd ever seen this movie, believe it or not. We're preparing for this review video, so. Of course, I watched and reviewed the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie last year. I think I don't remember if I did it in October, if I did it with my summer horror series. I also watched a remake with one of those series as well last year. Those were really the only two that I've watched all the way through until now. So, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. And of course, the reason that I'm watching this for the horror convention is there's going to be two big stars from this movie at the convention. Bill Johnson, who plays Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, and Bill Moseley, who famously played Chop Top, one of the family members from Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. They're both going to be at the Days of the Dead here in about 10 days. So excited to meet both of them. So let's just go ahead and get into it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, also known as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, is a 1986 American black comedy slasher film directed by Tobe Hooper. It is a sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also directed and co-written by Hooper. The film was written by L.M. Kit Carson and produced by Carson, Yorman Globus, Menachem Golan, and Hooper. Um, the plot follows a radio host victimized and captured by Leatherface and his cannibalistic family, while a former Texas marshal hunts them down. So basically, the film opens with two high school seniors, Buzz and Rick, racing along a desolate stretch of Texas highway en route to the Texas-Oklahoma football game at the Dallas Cotton Bowl and harass a pickup truck along the way. Heavily intoxicated, they use their car phone to call and harass on-air radio DJ Vanita Stretch Brock. Unable to convince them to hang up, Stretch is forced to keep the line open. As the two pass the same pickup truck, Leatherface emerges from the back of the truck and rips up the roof using his chainsaw. Rick tries shooting Leatherface with his revolver, but Leatherface kills Buzz. The car crashes, killing Rick. The following morning, Lieutenant Bode, Lefty Enright, former Texas Ranger and uncle of Sally and Franklin Hardesty, who were victims of Leatherface and his family years earlier, arrives at the scene of the crime to help solve Buzz and Rick's murders. Lefty has spent the last 13 years looking into his nephew's disappearance, investigating reports of mysterious chainsaw killings across Texas. He is contacted by Stretch, who brings him a copy of the audio tape that recorded the attack. He sends her away, leaving Stretch and LJ to reluctantly get radio coverage of a Texas-Oklahoma chili cook-off. The winner happens to be Drayton Sawyer, the current patriarch of the cannibalistic Sawyer family, who declares that his secret is having an eye for prime meat. So that's the setup and the premise. As far as the cast goes, Dennis Hopper as Lieutenant Bode Lefty Enright, Caroline Williams as Vanita Stretch Brock, Jim Sido as the cook, Bill Moseley as Chop Top, and Bill Johnson as Leatherface. So yeah, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from 1986. Obviously, this movie's quite a bit different than the original. The original very much had a very grindhouse documentary kind of feel, and it was very very unsettling, very creepy and kind of scary. And of course, Leatherface became a horror icon. This movie is very much the lighter side of the of Leatherface as well as his family. Very much in a horror comedy. Yeah, totally different tone. I mean, the tone is night and day between the first movie and this movie. For better or worse, depending on how you feel about it. But I have to say, I enjoyed this movie for what it is, to be honest with you. It's not as good as the original, especially from a horror standpoint. But I think it's a pretty worthy sequel with the directions that they took. And let's just go ahead and get into it, starting with the pros or the things I like about it. So there's just a lot of fun to be had in this movie. It isn't well, it's a horror comedy. It isn't like overly silly or ridiculous. I mean, some of these things actually do make sense. There is a bit of a story and plot here with some of these characters, like Lefty being tied to the first movie, Stretch being this DJ that's trying to warn people and help out, and ends up being entangled with the family as a result. And then some of the family characters as well. So it's like I said, it's definitely a horror comedy, but it's not like ridiculously silly where you can't watch it. It's really entertaining though and satisfying from a horror comedy standpoint. And the biggest thing is it has a lot of rewatchability. I mean, I could actually see rewatching this more often than the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Doesn't mean it's a better movie because it certainly isn't, especially from a horror standpoint. But from a rewatchability standpoint, I think this one holds up better because the first one could be kind of hard to watch because it feels so real and it's got a very claustrophobic and hot kind of feeling to it. Um, Obviously, the characters in this movie are really the thing that help to make it really entertaining and interesting, especially Chop Top, Lefty, and Stretch. I would say those three that just really enjoyed following them throughout this movie. I thought the performances by all three of the actors and actress were really good. Dennis Hopper, Caroline Williams, and especially Bill Moseley as Chop Top, who admittedly he really steals the show in this movie, even kind of outshines Leatherface. I mean, he's that character is just crazy over the top but fun. But yeah, those three characters in particular, I thought they all did a good job sort of leading you through this narrative, this story, and their characters are pretty well written and pretty interestingly flushed out here. So that was the biggest thing that makes this movie so watchable and entertaining. I feel like Bill Moseley and Caroline Williams specifically, they know what kind of movie they're in, and they do a great job of portraying their characters to make it fun for the viewer. The movie does have a lot more gore than the first movie. The first movie actually doesn't have any gore. It's known to be one of the goriest horror movies, which I think is still funny to this day. I think the idea of the first movie, a lot of people sort of make up the gore in their mind as opposed to what you actually see on camera, because you really don't see it on camera. But in this movie, they do explain as it's an 80s movie made in 1986, where the first movie was 1974. Of course, 80s horror movies are known in part for their gore, especially in slasher movies and stuff. So this movie does tap into that, especially at the beginning when those two teenage characters driving down the road end up getting killed. You get to see some fun gore there. So yeah, the movie does have more gore than the original movie does. Um, the first movie was more psychological with that documentary type feel. This movie tends to be more of a Hollywood budget type of 80s fun movie, 80s movie with fun kills, blood, and gore. I also have to say I really like the third act of this movie, the third act setting of the movie, I should say, at the Sawyer family hideout, this underground bunker that has very much a carnival look and atmosphere to it. And I think it really adds to this type of movie for what it's going for the tone of this movie. It's just a very fun setting, very carnivalistic. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, even though it's not as cool as the house from the first movie. It does make sense that they're kind of in hiding now in this underground bunker, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that really added to the final act of this movie. Um, I like the connections back to the first movie. It isn't just like a standalone Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. It really is tied to the first one, maybe more so than any of the other ones. Of course, I can't really say that because I haven't seen a lot of the other Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequels, but it seems like they all try to tie to the first movie while ignoring the rest of the sequels, which is interesting. But this movie, I like the fact that Dennis Hopper playing Sally and Franklin's uncle, there's a scene where he ends up finding Franklin's corpse in a wheelchair in this bunker. The Sawyer family carrying around the corpse of the hitchhiker from the first movie, kind of a sadistic sort of, they have fun with. Um, just returning characters from the family. It just makes for a really nice sequel that we can connect to from the first movie, and I like that. And then finally, my final pro for this movie, I really like the soundtrack, the music, and the score to this movie. Um, Unlike the first movie, which was very psychologically creepy and just kind of had sort of that '70s grindhouse tone, and this is a very fun. This is definitely within the '80s, like soundtrack. It's very fun and energetic and entertaining. It's an entertaining soundtrack that really works for this type of movie that they went for here. So yeah, I really like the score and the soundtrack to this movie. Getting on to some cons or some things I didn't like about it. Obviously, it is much more of a comedy and a lighthearted sort of take on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it doesn't have a lot of scares or real horror the way that the first one did. Um, there's no really there's no real tension or suspense in this movie. Just a lot of humor and a lot of lighter tones. Really relying more on the characters within this family to sort of carry the movie, along with these outside characters and Lefty and Stretch that I mentioned as well. So that's one thing. If you're looking to be scared, this movie's probably not going to do it for you. I didn't really care for the fact that they revisited the whole dinner scene from the first movie and tried to imitate it. It felt really unnecessary and monotonous. It doesn't really work nearly as well in this movie either because of the tones in that first movie compared to the tones in this movie. I mean, in this movie, when they try to do it, it's much played much more for comedy. So it's obviously not disturbing. Where in that first movie, it was much more disturbing. That and the fact they were actually sitting at a real kitchen table that was, made out of skeleton bones and stuff like that. So just didn't work as well in this movie. And there was really no reason for it. The ending of this movie, with how ambiguous it is with a lot of the characters' fates, really doesn't work for me either. You don't get any closure. Don't show any of the characters really dying or escaping, other than Stretch, played by Caroline Williams. It just kind of ends, and that felt kind of disappointing and unsatisfying. I don't know if they ran out of money. There's a hint that there's an explosion that happens, but we don't really see any of that other than from the outside. You hear it and you see a little bit of it, but you don't actually see like the characters dealing with it. And that was kind of disappointing. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it was a budget thing or if they just decided that they just weren't going to do that. But either way, it would have been nice to have a little bit more closure there. And then finally, people have talked about it, but Stretch dancing around with the chainsaw, the last image of the movie doesn't really make sense, and it's a really a weak ending to the movie, just really silly and ridiculous. And I just thought they could have ended the movie a lot better than that. Even though I like Caroline Williams, I thought she was one of the better horror final girl protagonists, whatever you want to say. I really liked her character, but that was just sort of silly. Where she's, and I get the idea that, I mean, I get the it's probably the idea that she's kind of lost her mind now and she's crazy, and I don't know, it just didn't work for me. So, but those are my cons, guys. But overall, I enjoyed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. It's not a perfect movie. Like I said, it's not as good as the first movie, especially from a horror standpoint, but I still enjoyed it. I have a lot of fun with it. Chop Top is one of the great horror comedy characters of all time. Bill Moseley does a great job. I can't wait to ask him about it. I think I'm going to give this movie I'm between a 7.5 and an 8. I'm going to give it an 8. Maybe it's recency bias, but I really had a good time with it. Despite some of the flaws that I mentioned, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I'm not, I like some horror comedies. I don't go out of my way for them, but when they work like this one does in Zombieland, I'm down for it. So 8 out of 10 for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 from 1986. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys think of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from 1986. Do you like it more than I do, less than I do, about the same? Why not? Comment down below. Excuse me. Please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos for this series. Sorry, I'm getting a little verklempt. Still dealing with this crap that I'm coughing up. Please subscribe to my channel as well so you don't miss any of my great horror content coming up this series and beyond. So I hope you're enjoying this series. I'm certainly enjoying watching these movies and preparing for this Days of the Dead convention. Hope everybody's doing well, but stay scared. Bye.